Continuing right along with the Rhino training, one training guide over here in Learn Rhino. I've actually brought it into here so it's a little more convenient. I grabbed the delete file, which is for the Chapter 5 modeling helpers. And what it covers is it talks a little bit about what grid snap is. It snaps the constraints of, I believe, definitely the grid. The render's not going to show it up. You have to go back to shaded to see that. You could toggle that on and off. We'll talk about that. Ortho is going to keep things in XYZ position, sliding around and selecting. Planar is going to push it all to the planes, whatever construction plane is there, or whatever construction plane you're working with. The object snaps are going to activate all these wonderful things here, all those little tiny ones that you might want to snap to the end. You might want to snap to the my Grasshopper's in the way here, so I'm going to close it out and open it later. But you may want to have your object snap on. And that's interesting. There we go. I should be. Oh, this mouse is giving me trouble. What is going on? What did I just do? Oh my gosh, disable that. I just put my object snaps over there for some reason. Don't ask me why. Oh my gosh. I have to reset that. Object snaps. This is weird. I guess I pushed it up onto the side and I didn't mean to do that. Can I take those object snaps and put them back down here where I want them? There they are. So I don't know what happened there. My object snaps. I think it's my mouse that stinks. And my kids have taken all the good ones. So object snaps, planar, ortho. Object snaps can go to all these wonderful things. There's actually a second tier of object snaps if you need it. I've got it on disable. We'll leave it enabled and we'll do point, near, end. Oh, possibly even center. We might end up using that, maybe mid. You could leave it all on. Just disable it with I think a shift key takes it off. Yeah, shift key actually shift key shows you all those other awesome, or at least I thought it did. There we go. Control key will give you the from, perp form, perpendicular from, tangent from, a long line, a long point, all these incredible ones that you can get into. We don't need to go there. They talk about Smart Track, which will keep things kind of parallel from viewport to viewport, which gets close to the elevator mode we can talk about. And we can also have Gumball, which is a great tool on because you start to move and rotate and scale things. Recorded history is why we go into Grasshopper. So anyway, that flows. And then they cover in Chapter 5 what all the F keys do. So F1 is a help key. I think I'll just drag that down here and you can see it. It's pretty cool. And I'll just make it a little larger. Well, we'll just leave it on that scale. You see F1 is help. Command history is F2. You get your properties panel with F3, unassigned and unassigned. Skip those. The camera toggle, the grid toggle, the ortho toggle, the snap toggle, the points on, points off. I don't actually use those at all. I don't think I'm not much of an F person, so I'm not going to use those. And what we've got going on here is interesting that this one went green. I guess I changed the layer on that one to curves. But after it goes through there, it talks about selecting items and practice of using select items. So here's an example right here. You can see up here in the top view, we have the top view of all of these hexagons. Now here you can see there are a variety of things. So if I click here, it's going to say, which one do you want? And as I hover over here, take a look at my perspective viewport, and there's different ones that I might want to grab. So that one actually was this one grabbed. It's not actually the top. And those are things that appear coincident because of the views that you're actually in. So I'm going to leave that one. They show you very quickly how you can, you watch this as I try and select left or right. I can't select anything, but when you do encompass something, when you do encompass something in full, hang on, when you encompass something in full like that piece, you will end up selecting it. And because there were some points that were encompassed in full, it selected those as well. If you go left to right, anything it touches all will be selected. So you just want to practice with that, and you'll find out which viewports are probably the best for selecting. So this one, if I start here and go all the way to here, I'm going to select those two. But because those lines are broken up, I didn't get the other ones. So I might want to start here. Oops, it's a little small, so it's giving me a little bit of trouble. I could start here, which would technically grab everything, and it would be only those two, along with all the points that were inside that. So you'll learn a little bit of left to right and right to left for selection. You can get in and use the edit menu and select objects, which is pretty cool. You can go in here and select objects, and then look, you can grab all your curves, and you grab them. And you do that, which is handy. And what I like is this one, the bar filter, which is a convenience going down here, and you say, listen, I only want, right click on this one, you'll only get curves. And then when I do a select, with that activated, I can only select curves. I can't select these. Doesn't matter what I try, I can't do it. If I only do poly surfaces, or if I only do surfaces, then I should be able to only select that one surface, even though I was selecting everything in that frame. And then if you want to reset that, you just right-click on Disable, I think, and it sets everything back up, and you can select everything in your screen as long as you encompass it left to right or touch on it right to left. So that's really what that whole section is about. Locking visibility on objects, they go through and they start getting in the layers. And I think anybody beginning Rhino should start thinking in layers. And there's a few examples here. We're going to go back into Grasshopper and play around with these curves in a minute. But right now I want to finish this tutorial in the sense of what it was touching on. You can go in, and what's nice is you grab this little surface. We can click on here and we can change that to red. And all of a sudden, that's going to be a red item, the curves right there. If I go into poly surfaces and I decide I want to have that as a, let's go down here and grab a blue. That's going to grab a blue, change those. So you can start changing colors of objects. You can also lock them on that you can't touch them. That's a little frustrating. I'm touching on it. Why won't I select it? Well, I've got it locked that I can't do anything. And these are layers. And what they end up pushing is as you go through here, they say, listen, play around with that, have fun with the layers, create new layers, change layers, create sub-layers within layers. And then they go in and they say, okay, draw that camera file again. And camera, I have to learn to spell it. Double click on it, open your camera file. Don't have to save anything you did there. And your camera file is totally set up. Hang on a second, Oscar. He's playing with a Nerf gun. What they say is try and understand within this layer why certain things are on sublayers, why you would move them in, why you would move them out. And there are great questions at the end for extra credit. They say is to discuss with your class how hierarchical layers can be used to organize models in different industries. So I think of healthcare, think of automotive, think of architecture and things like that. So this one actually is broken into the lens, which you can have. You can actually turn that off. And what's interesting is if you turn off the body, say, you're going to turn off everything connected with the body, which is all the trim and all the sub layers in between. I guess I should stretch this out so you can actually see what kind of language is being used there. And stretch this out a little bit this way so we can read it in full. We'll stretch this one out. And there we go. You've got the trim details. You get the flash switch, you get the bumper, and you can start editing exactly what you have there, turning that on. And actually, you can just see it on the back of it, this little clip on the back. So look down in the right front, the bumper up at the top, which is a beveled, darker rendered surface, a fillet on the tool. The screen itself is editing something, and I don't know where that screen is. Needless to say, that's basically it. Trim body. You can change your layers by coming down here to the body and setting your current layer. Now you're working on that one. And you can change the colors whatever you want, just like we did before. Let's make it brilliant red and see what happens to it. So keep in mind that I like to take things to render here. I usually work them in, shaded. And I'm going to keep showing this because Wickerson Studios likes this technique. Technical over here, which is hard to see with that background. And pen and ink over here because I like to make pen and ink drawings, and artistic here. And then when things do start to disappear, you might want to go into File Properties and change the appearance of things. I believe, it's been a while since I did it, the colors and appearance, that you can start changing the backgrounds and having fun. So this might actually jump a little bit if I was to make it a horrible cyan blue. And I don't know if you want to do that. You can always restore your defaults if you don't like what you did, and then have it back to normal. So that's basically the gist of it. But let's go back to this little scholarly hack, because we all want to be scholarly. We all want scholarship, but we all want to be scholarly people. And we'll go back into, what was called delete. I think that was the other file. So what was happening here? And what a wealth of information that's tucked into this thing. And what could we do with it? And I think this is exciting because now, the reason you're watching this series is because you realize Wickerson likes to play around with Grasshopper. So I will go in and either I can extend this out and click the Grasshopper icon, or I can start typing Grasshopper, hit it, and I open up a Grasshopper port window. And there it is. It's a little big, so we'll shrink it down here. And we have a nice canvas that we can play around with, and we'll try saving this under something. So this was called delete, but I think it's called select objects. So I'm going to open, I think I had a file, object selection objects under Grasshopper. So I'm going to open that and see what's there. And actually nothing's there, but I was planning on doing something with This will be my third video. So let's go in here and have a little fun with curves. And let's go back to here and let's select curve selection. Edit. And you get better and better at this. And I would really recommend, let's go in. Why am I getting so foolish? Why have I forgotten? View, curve, selection. Why am I losing my mind? Select objects, curves. So I've gotten that. So I've selected them all. So let's just tuck them in. Nothing worth it. You can move them all. Let's import them all as set multiple curves. Now we're in Grasshopper. And we can take those curves and we can take them to visibility and get rid of them. They're gone. They're only ghosted in there. And they're pretty interesting. But since we may play with a surface, let's go in here as well. Edit, select objects. Let's select surfaces. And we have it selected. So let's go grab a container for a geometry surface. Put it in here. And let's just do a quick set multiple surfaces, just in case there was more than one. Go back to visibility, take it off. We have a ghosted surface. We have ghosted lines. And we have, and actually, I think it's a little much. Let me just grab this line. And I think what I'm going to do is take that as a little side project. We'll just subcategorize it in here because I'm going to play with a subcurve. I'm going to set this one as set one curve because I think I'm going to end up using that. And then let's take that off. And then let's go into curve, edit again. You get better as you go. Select objects. Let's select poly surfaces. And let's treat those as geometries. Now, they could be boundary representations. They could be other terms, what you want to call them. But I'm going to select those and select multiple sections. And there they are. And then go back here and turn them off. Now, I have everything ghosted and I'm out of Rhino. And I'm not dependent. Now, what I look at is I say, here's all these objects off. And this is being replicated by these curves. But all of these curves are what's happening here. I just want this one curve, and I want to do something to it. So I'm going to go to a quick transform and try and make this series as close as I can. And I don't know the exact specs on it. But let's just use a little Euclidean copy and move. But we can just use move because move is kind of like copying. And let's move that up, and you'll see it just do-si-doed up. It went from here to here. And if I hover over here, it says it moves 10 units. But there's 1, 2, 3, 4 that it's moving to. So I'll bet you that object moved to the default 10 in position that I can go into maths. And like I said, in Grasshopper, you're going to learn all these other things. Lines, curves, transformations, surfaces. But if you can get your head around maths, sets, and vectors, you're going to be in great shape. And I'm going to immediately do what grade 10 math tells you to do. Find a range. And I'm going to want to move this in steps. I'm going to want to move it to a domain. And I'm going to double click and type a 2, which gives me a number slider from 0 to 10. And because I want to move that in a domain from 0 to 10, I'm going to want to move that, and I need a vector to move it in. So I'm going to go up to vector, and I'm going to grab my Z vector, which it was a default. And this is where it gets a little tricky. And you can see it's taking 10 of these and moving them in 10 units in that direction. So I've kind of mimicked those lines, but I haven't done it to the same count. So what I'm going to do, just to be specific, is I am going to programmatically organize this. And this is where it gets fun. And I was going to guess, and I was going to type in a number and do something fancy pants here. But instead, I'm going to take this curve, re-bring these back in, and I'm going to grab, I'm going to actually grab just, this is giving me trouble. It's a little hard to grab because of the snap. I'm going to grab those 4 objects, and I'm going to, I think there's 5 total, set multiple. And what I have in here, and it's a very useful tool to always use your panels. And I am, with any panel tool, showing you what I've selected. I have, starting at 0 count, 4 curves. I'm also going to use a param viewer, which is another great tool for telling you what's happening within there. You have what's referred to as one branch, which is this bar, symbolized by this darker bar, and you have 4 items on it. There's 4 curves on it. So if I do that, I can go back into my sets and say, give me a list give me a list length. And that's going to give me 4. And if I take 4 and put it into the range, you see exactly what happened. I was able to take that and move that 4 tools. And I'm going to take off my curves. I'm going to take off all my stuff in Rhino. And you're going to see that I'm getting a little closer to this even so. That range is giving me, but you'll see it's giving me 5 values. And this is where Grasshopper starts to throw you a few curveballs, and it's very frustrating. I was trying to mimic those ghosted forms through my program, so when I slid it and chose different items, I can move that, but I'm not lining it up perfectly. And it's because this list length, when you divide a range, you always get an extra value. So I have to go into here, and this is where your first programming will begin. I could take my list length, which is actually the number 4, but it jumps up to 5. So what I'm going to want to do with the steps is decrease it by 1. And this is where you use your Maths tab. We're going to minus this list length. We're going to double click, and I'll show you a little shortcut. Quotes 1. I have a little 1 panel here. I'll put it in, and I'll plug that into the steps. And now, am I getting closer to what's actually happening? And there it is. And I'm still offset 1, 2. This is interesting. I have these objects. Let's take a look. Specifically, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 in the 10 set that I still am not lining up fully to what was happening within that lift. But you can see how you can start to play with this. And another thing I wanted to show, besides tucking in this minus symbol, you can right-click on the steps, go into Expression, and you can type X as the variable, -1, and hit Commit. And now you can bypass this and plug this directly in and avoid writing these nodes. And that is critical, what just happened there. What I just did was I actually started my programming within a function of trying to make things work and line this up. And I'm looking at this as a distance, and I'm very close with this, but I still mathematically can't figure it out. And I'm going to leave you with that, because I don't think it's about watching tutorials. I think it's about logically trying to figure out what's going on and solve your own problems. And why don't these exactly line up? It might be a matter that you have to go back to the original Rhino file and say, hey, how did they move these points? Maybe that point was supposed to be up there. Maybe it was supposed to be, maybe they didn't loft it. Maybe it was their fault. Maybe it's not my fault and they've lost it in a position that technically, you have to get in here and find out exactly where you want it to be. Maybe the loft was not programmatically done and they just lofted it by moving it with their hands. So the logic of your code is not exactly that. But I hope that offers a little bit of complexity to what you're doing. Keep in mind that we are going to return to all of these files. We are going to try and script these later in this series when we're done the tutorials into the GH-Python node and into the C# node. So you can look forward to that. And you can start to have a little fun with this. We'll leave that on and we'll take a look at the surface. There's not much happening in this surface, but what are some things that you can do to a surface? What would you do to that surface in Rhino when you looked at it? There's the ghosted form. There's the hard form of it. You may want to build a grid and find out if points are contained within that surface or if they're outside of that surface. So that's getting into some analysis of what's happening. You can, with that surface, the first thing I do is usually go in and debrep and find out what are the parts of that. And as we take a look, we can have faces, which are surfaces, and I usually pull out another param to take a look at that. That will be very similar to the surface we had before. I'm going to take that all, and I'm going to hide objects, because I don't need to confuse myself with the Rhino window. But I actually have this surface, and I have the original surface that's on there and the faces that are there. The edges will be curves, so start to analyze your curves. And you'll see what I have here. I could take it so I'm only seeing those curves. And what happens with that is usually you will go in and you will take everything else and make preview off. So then when you're looking at something preview on, you're only seeing exactly what you want. And I need to get back in here because I keep hiding everything. Let's do that. Let's do hide. And it's saying, okay, select objects to hide. There, everything's gone. So I'm only looking at that surface, and I'm only looking at that curve. And then are there vertices associated with this as kind of points? And so let's take a look and see if there actually is any point. There is the beginning of that curve. And that can be very interesting for data, because now you're breaking down that surface and able to do a lot more than what you were doing in Rhino with that surface. And one example would be very simply, not to complex this a little much, is let's do a point. Let's do a midpoint. Well, let's not do a midpoint. Let's do a points on curve analysis. Where is it? Point on curve. And I'm able to draw out not just the start or stop of that point. If we look at it, I can actually slide around and take that all the way around that curve as it's reparametized from the start or stop. And that's a good little power to have, because you not only have the point that it began with, you have this point that you're analyzing to. Let's keep the assignment very, very simple. The start and end point. And now I'm able to draw a line that I parametrically can control between that surface. And you start to see, by doing this, the power of what actually happens within Grasshopper, and your mind starts to wander. The last thing that I have, let me just take these to preview off, make it so we see everything that's been selected. We had this one here, which is this object, and the other object. They actually come in as two objects. And a little exercise that I like to do with two objects is go into sets, go into, what do I usually do? It has to be sets, probably in list, and take a dispatch. And I always think a dispatch is something Shakespearean, and Hamlet or Macbeth dispatching the Earl of Cumberland, which is basically taking his head from his feet. If I do what's called flattening a list, what's actually happening here, and this is kind of not advanced, but it's getting into data, you'll see that I have two objects on one branch. If you don't believe me, I can look at my param viewer, which I told you about earlier, and it's saying you have one branch with two objects. If I was to flatten that list, which is basically cut the tree down and count all the pieces, I am going to have, let me graph that list, put a branch on each one. This list, which was flattened, and I'm complicating things, I'm going to take out my graph. I'm actually going to take this list and see that I have one branch. Because it's already been flattened, I didn't have to do it. You can see that as I grab this data and I take a look at what's in A group, I have one item and one item on one list, and the same thing is for B. So now I can treat them separately, and I've kind of blasted them apart, which is nice to have done. Now that I have these two objects, I can go in and I can do the same thing with kind of a deep rep, because the boundary representation can be a surface, but it can also be a solid. I'm going to take that and consider the faces associated with that, and go into a simple tool of list items, grabbing the whole list. I'm able to say there are a list items of 3 items, so I can set a number slider by typing 0, 2, 2, because we start counting at 0, and I'm able to visualize the surfaces as I roll around on that, the top, the bottom, and the sides. And in doing so, you can actually go in here and grab the other 2 list items, which is very nice. You don't have to roll through them. You have all 3. You could actually do something to this. I'm going to take a little pause, be back in a second. Grab a little geometry here, and I'm going to grab it 3 times and show you that we can actually visualize what we're grabbing. This one, and this one. And because I want to actually take those 2 surfaces, the top and the bottom, I can go into my math tools. And this is where you wander. This is where I don't really teach tutorials to things. I just grab an area to find a centroid. And I might grab that area again to find a centroid. But that's not going to be too exciting to draw a line between and produce new geometries because of past geometries. Go into curve. Take a centroid from here and start point and end point. You can see that we actually have a line that's formed because of the data of this shape that I created from that object all the way back to the start. What would be more exciting is if I went back in and said, hey, what happens if I take the edge of some of this? What if I grabbed, what if I took this object and took the edges up here and said, well, let's make that list item the edge. there's a bunch of edges. I can also go in and grab a curve and say, do I want that edge? Do I want this edge? Well, if I wanted that edge, the bottom edge, and I was happy with the top centroid, I could also take this data and I could use what I just used in curves to do an analysis of point on curve. And as long as it's reparameterized, you'll see that I can grab a point that circles around all the way around that. And if that becomes the point that I want to send to the end, now I have the ability to draw a line between here from the center point to any point on that curve. If I end up taking that through a range, it can be pretty exciting. So in the end, you're left with a pretty complex little tool that if I start to do something like produce a piped surface out of this at a pretty good radii right there, and I'm just going to set it the round flaps, I've got this interesting little toy and tool that I can start to play with. Now this is doing a lot more through a program structure of just starting to build in Grasshopper. And I didn't mean to confuse you too much, but I wanted to show you the effects of working in Grasshopper and where the mind starts to wander and you start to have a little bit of fun with what you're doing. I like to see my whole script. As soon as you get up to a dozen nodes to building a script, it can be pretty fun. And I think if I take it back to our original visibility and put everything back on, you'll see that I've actually, from very simple tutorial in Rhino, had fun producing a little tiny, ridiculous little toy. And I'm going to try to keep doing this, and I'll share these files, save, as I pair them with these shared files over in Rhino. So this one I think is, I will just do a little, I didn't mean to do an incremental save. I'm going to do a file, save as, and I don't think we have it titled yet. This was selection options. I'll save it there, and we'll say replace it. And so you can have that file alongside this file on my GitHub to start playing around with. You're left with some of these cool geometries. Long video, but it shows the power of learning Rhino at the same time as you're learning something like Grasshopper. Believe me, in the end, when something's worthy, we will be taking these into one single nodes, which Jose Luis Garcia does so well on his parametric camp. He puts everything he ends up doing into a single C# node. I'm not really a firm believer in that. He mentions at one time, would it be better to have smaller scripts in C and Python and custom nodes that actually do smaller things so you can have as much fun building in C and Python as you can working node scripting through Grasshopper. Hope that makes sense, and I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to keep going with this series because my mind isn't going to run out.